Hello, imaginary friends. We are blessed once again by the presence of Cindy Bryan, our editor friend, and she is here today to regale us with all the things that are wrong with the first chapter of my book.
No.
I just wanted a strong intro, you know.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right.
Okay.
That's good. I approve.
I like
So without further ado, here we go. The first chapter of Dysmaris, the Half-Knight. There is a manuscript held in the Bodleian Library, a scrap from a letter addressed from one sovereign to another. But if anyone apart from myself were able to read it, they would uncover two very shocking facts. Firstly, that the addressee was a dead person, and had been suffering from that condition for several decades before the letter was written. Secondly, they would find that the writer of that letter claimed to be the liege, the overlord, of the deceased, not previously when the recipient had been alive and a king besides, but at the time of writing. The writer, though, was somebody nobody had ever heard of. Chapter 1. Nicholas, not Nick. France, August 1346. Nick! Somebody called out. Nicholas Dysmaris didn't answer. He was not a proper Nick, and he knew it. There were several other Nicks in his company who were. Nick Rake had thoroughly earned his name by behaving unjustly to women, and also occasionally to men. Nick Trowbridge was a happy drunkard who spent his money with a friendly swagger. Nick Burton had fought in 2 campaigns, and Nick Tyler was the head of a Mason's guild. All of those things were Nick-worthy, but Nicholas Dysmaris was not. He was thoughtful, which meant that he was never very good at wounding his opponents, bullying his lessers, murdering wild animals, or doing any of those things required of a minor member of the landed gentry. Instead, he thought quite a lot about the causes and effects of things, particularly his own actions, and particularly when he ought probably to be acting than thinking about acting. People like that might be called Nicholas, but never Nick. So when a manly sort of person put his hand on his shoulder and again said, "Nick!" he turned round, fully expecting to see a disappointed face. He wasn't wrong. "Ah," said the person, "you're not Nick, are you?" And that was the sum of his temporal relations with King Edward, third of that name, whose hand and disappointed face there had been. Immediately after this, Dysmaris, who was thinking about whether the king's hand bestowed any special favour on one's shoulder, even when the placement was coincidental, put on his gloves, took up his hammer, and formed a line with the other Nicks, as well as more men who would have been called Nick had their mothers thought of it, on a road just inside the town of Crazy-en-Pontu. They had crowded together to risk life and limb in proving the French claims of the king whom Dysmaris had just disappointed, and they were, most of them, well armoured and enthusiastic. Dysmaris was neither. His property was small, a half-knight's fee, and he had quite stupidly spent his income on schooling, so that when the Earl of Warwick had called him to arms, he'd had only the money for a well-beaten hauberk and a war-hammer that had probably been meant for the forge. As to enthusiasm, he was right not to have it, because he was too thoughtful to be enthusiastic about killing or dying, and he was not very good at either of those things, not yet. In fact, he'd still been thinking about what Master Gadsden had asked at university about whether it is better to kill or to be killed when Italian crossbows began to stick their bolts in his crooked shield. And then he thought about things like force and trajectory. And as the French horse galloped toward all the Nicks in England, he certainly thought about all the ways one might avoid being trampled, lanced, or bludgeoned. But it did not occur to him that none of those things might happen. They didn't. The Nicks that fired arrows rained hell down on the French knights, and the few French who managed to wade across the flooded field and arrive at the English lines were quickly dispatched. The sole Frenchman that swedged through it all to approach our Nicholas was in such a mettle that Dysmaris couldn't bring himself to swing at him. He found he had only to take the reins and lead the knight's horse quietly aside. He had meant to do the man a favour, as he had looked so lost, but the yeoman to whom he handed the horse quizzed him about his prize, and only then did Dysmaris realise that the knight was his prisoner. The knight himself did not seem bothered one way or the other at the time. But when the battle was ended, and the prisoners again delivered to their captors, Nicholas, could find no trace of his hostage. He looked out through a drizzle over the muddied field, and saw only pages and heralds conferring with the dead. So he slogged toward the tents of the English camp, but found it impossible to divert anyone from their revelries who might otherwise direct him to his gentle prey. At last he was greeted from behind by a boy in dark rags. He knew that because he turned round. "Nicholas," the boy had called him doubtfully, in an accent that was not quite French, or perhaps not quite anything. The boy had enormous bright eyes and an enormous white nose that appeared to be preparing a coup on the rest of his face. "Yes?" said Dysmaris to the large and filthy nose. Large and watery eyes stared back at him, then squinted. And then the boy leant in far too closely, as if rooting out a stubborn secret from between Dysma's armor and his clothes. This may not seem important, but it is. Still, supposing the boy was really looking for a proper Nick and not himself, the half-knight offered his full name. Dysmaris, Nicholas Dysmaris, of Monkenton. Evidently a Dysmaris would do, because the boy immediately slipped something out of his rags, a dirty, folded-up bit of calfskin that barely fit into his stick-like hand, and which he flung at Nicholas as if he expected it would burst into flame. Then he backed away, shambling like a frightened cat. Dysmaris looked down. There was writing on the calfskin, which appeared to include a butchered variation on his name, so he unfolded it. It was a note he couldn't read. He looked up again to ask the boy whence the thing had come, but it was gone, completely, vanished like a hare in a thicket. Dysmaris walked to his rain-flattened tent, righted it, something others had a servant to do, sat down inside it and jettisoned the rainwater from his boots. No servant for that either. It was evening now, so he lit a candle, he was forced to borrow one, and opened the calfskin to the meagre light. The note was certainly not in English, and it was not in French. It was not in any language related to English or French, nor to Latin or Greek. In fact, the strokes and scratches indented on the crude vellum were as unrelated to his own alphabet as he could imagine. He tried to make sense of it, turning it round, reading it backward or downward, or even in circles. But he was out of his depth. It was then that our Nicholas half-knight had his most significant realization. He would need help. Mercifully, he remembered a friend he had made on the Channel crossing, a clerk in the service of the Earl of Warwick. This man had lived but a few years more, but had learnt 7 languages and could write in all of them. He was also well versed in mathematics, music, and astronomy, had studied Galen and the Greeks, rubbed both elbows with the aristocracy, and was inconceivably stylish. Dysmaris may not have thought much about the latter, but it was true. It was also true that the half-knight would probably have starved, bled, burnt to death, or evaporated, if not for this obscenely stylish and knowledgeable friend, as you will see. The man's name was Dysmaris, or simply Lemaire, and he was very busy and very good-looking, though I doubt Dysmaris thought anything about that, and Nicholas quite rightly went to look for him. After searching in vain among the lavish tents of Lord Warwick and embarrassing himself frequently, Nicholas at last flapped the calfskin about in desperation and shouted as a final resort, "Does anyone know who could translate a rarity?" He might have led with that. He was immediately directed to the man himself, who was in my lord's tent, the one tent to which Dysmaris dared not go, sitting at a desk, which is a wooden thing used for writing. He was extremely busy doing precisely that, but stood anyway out of courtesy. They clapped hands, and Dysmaris assured the half-knight that he was quite glad to see him alive, but that he was quite busy, because, as I've said, he was. "I see," said Dysmaris. "It's just that I don't know if anyone else can translate this." This was a gauntlet thrown, and Dysmaris picked it up with a grin. "Let me see it," he said. He unfolded the unkempt parcel in front of the candles and knew immediately the answers to Dysmaris' questions. "Is it French?" "No, Lord, no," he said. "In fact, I'll have to... Oh, you mean the bit on the front? That's Languedoc, the language of Aquitaine. It mentions yourself and what I take to be another person, probably, and then it describes a place of some sort." "What place?" Dysmaris wanted to know. "Where is it?" "In Aquitaine, I suppose," the mayor told him. "Is it from the night I took prisoner?" "I haven't the slightest idea, but if you were to send someone to Bordeaux, I think you might... Hang on. What is the name of your hostage?" "I never spoke to the knight," Dysmaris dared to admit. "I didn't get his name." And then he looked round, embarrassed. He probably imagined that Warwick and the several rare knights and ladies and the dozen squires far wealthier than himself had paused in their revelry to glare at him. He would have been right. "I've looked for him and I can't find him," he said. "Nor the horse." Obviously, this was a cry for help. Dysmaris was very busy, but he was also very curious. So back to the fringe of the bloody battle they went, and in short order they stood before a herald, who directed them to a sergeant, who directed them to several pages and other servants who were washing and brushing and feeding the captured horses under the shade of some trees. They did it with their shirts off. I mention it because it was hot, even in the dark. August, you know. It's hot. "They're not ready," said one of the lads, talking about the horses. "Most of them. Won't be till tomorrow." Dysmaris pointed at a dark grey destrier, dappled white and feathered at the hooves. Its mane and tail were black as pitch, its neck defiant and strong, and it was easily the handsomest horse of the lot. And that one? He dared to ask. The lads made faces and whistled, in the bad sort of way. She yours? Asked the lad. Dysmaris nodded. I think so. The lads made more faces. You can take her if you like, said the one. Won't let us near her. Can't talk to her, feed her, wash her, and she's making the stallions peevish. Dysmaris quizzed them whilst Dysmaris stared at the beautiful creature, and as it happened they couldn't tell him where the thing had come from or anything about the knight who had owned it, nor why he had chosen to train a mare for battle. They couldn't tell him because they hadn't spoken with the knight nor with any of his retinue, because there had been no one to speak to. The horse had come alone. There was no rider, Dysmaris suddenly heard the fellow say. Came walking to us unescorted, didn't she? Reins are stretched out as if a body had the lead, but only no one did have. And then she stands there all proud amongst these gentlemen, he meant the stallions, and you'd think the gates of hell had opened, the way she reared and they reared and stomped. He signed a cross over his forehead. The pages were skittish now, too, merely from talking of it, whereas Dysmaris assured them that there had indeed been a knight or rider, and that he had one servant at the least. He described them both to the lads, but they were certain they had seen neither one. Dysmaris and de la Mare were at a loss. But that was when it happened. Dysmaris, stretching out his arm, called out to the mare. He spoke something that rang rather with enchantment, and although he was not next to her, and though there was no reason for her to know who, if anyone, he was speaking to, she turned her powerful neck to gaze at him. I believe he repeated himself. And he looked quite the fool as he did it, the sort of fool who isn't bothered what he looks like because of what he is looking at. And then she came to him. Through a dozen rows of struggling horses, calm as a queen, she stepped unfalteringly to where the two men were waiting until her silken head was in the half-knight's hand. It was at this time that de la Mare recognized he was about to become a great deal busier. That is the end of chapter 1.
I love the premise of your story.
Cool.
Love the Nick distinctions. I think that's engaging, and I think that will capture readers really quick. And the end of the chapter is a good hook, a really good hook into chapter 2, and that's always what you look for. You grab the readers and propel them into chapter 2, and that's excellent. Dysmaris is a sympathetic character, and I think readers will like him. The Nick thing is relatable, and also those other things. I think he's a good sympathetic main character there. And I'm just hoping, but I'm hoping that the horse will possibly be a secondary character we can relate to or get connected with.
Vulcan Sildro, Lord of the Sabulia. Are you the gatekeeper?
Don't change the story. That's just what I'm hoping.
Knowing Daniel, you're probably right.
I that's really actually, but I mean, you're responding to what you've read and telling me this is, as a reader and probably as an editor as well, like this is what you're expecting and wanting. So that's exactly what I need to hear.
I'm also a sucker for animals in a story. I'm just, that's the truth of it. I don't put that out there too much because I don't want to get a flurry of bad stories with animals.
Okay.
Or a furry of bad animals.
A furry of, whatever. That could go way off base real fast. But shame on you, Caleb, for saying that. On the prologue, my suggestion is to go with less is more.
Okay.
And it is a short prologue. A quirky is very good, too, in a prologue. I like that. And that is a very quirky little prologue. But it's a little bit too obscure. The remedy for that is not more, but less. Honestly, what I would cut out is the first-person narrative bits and leave it in sort of an omniscient so that it reads a little bit differently. It is not very much, but it just changes the tone just a tiny little bit. I think I would leave off that last line.
Okay.
Mainly because after you get started, whatever humorous bits you have going, your readers will understand you more. But they don't know you yet, and they don't know your voice and your writing yet in the prologue. And if the prologue, the message is obscure and the humor is unknown to them, it may just be too confusing. They may not know what to do with it. There's a manuscript, one sovereign to another. If anyone were to read it, they would uncover 2 very shocking facts. Just make it straight omniscient narrative.
Okay.
Second, they'd find that the writer of the letter claimed to be the liege of the deceased. Probably not add the extra stuff, just because they can't really hear your voice there. That is the most specific I'm going to get about cutting things, because your prologue was well done and it's complete right there. Now, starting with your chapter, my general observations is I really like the title. Nicholas, Not Nick. It's a great title.
Okay.
Good chapter titles are not important, but if you start with a great title, you commit yourself to always making great titles. Just keep that in mind.
Okay.
Yes.
Because your reader will go, oh, that's a great title, and then they're going to be looking for a great title every chapter.
I totally do that.
You can't just do chapter 4.
You can do chapter 4. Well, not after a great title. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Lots and lots of great writers don't put chapter titles.
Yeah.
You don't have to have chapter titles. But if you love making chapter titles and you love making them great, just be prepared to follow through. And if you're published, and if you have somebody like me as your editor, be prepared for chapter breaks that you weren't expecting and new chapter titles. Not all editors will do that, but I will put in chapter breaks if I feel like they need to be there, and say, guess what? You need 5 new chapter titles.
Right.
Good luck, Daniel.
And I just had to do that with an author who writes fantastic chapter titles. And I said, good luck. because she was writing some really snappy chapter titles. And I thought, ew, I hate doing this to her, because she wrote some really great, all of them are great. So she has to write 5 or 6 more
Nice.
great
Awesome.
titles.
Yeah. If anyone can do it, it's Daniel.
That's right.
Thank you, Kelly.
Now, we're going to talk about point of view. Point of view in general for writers is the dreaded thing.
Okay.
Because it's a bugbear. It's a hard thing, and it can get out of hand. It can get away from you. Even for writers who with lots and lots of experience, they still have slips in point of view.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be writing right along, and it's like, whoops, where'd that come from? It just happens.
Yeah.
We all do it, because writing is not the way we talk in regards to point of view. We have to be careful in our writing. Most of this chapter is close third perspective, but you also drop into first person narrative. You can have multiple third person perspectives in a novel, and you can have a first person narrator in a book about somebody else who's the main character. But you can't really have a first person narrator about somebody else and also have that person in third person narrative, because those two will conflict and distract from your reader's involvement in the story. And the goal is always going to be to keep your reader embedded in the story. You're just going to have to do some hard work to make it happen. But I think you can't. I don't know how the rest of the story goes in your head, so you're going to have to decide how to make that work best. But you can probably keep telling it the way you're telling it, but you can't keep that third person from Nicholas's perspective as easily without losing some of your reader connectiveness.
Okay.
Because they don't know who to connect with.
Have you read The Wizards of Once?
I don't remember.
So in the beginning of The Wizards of Once, they have the narration starts as, I'm a character in this story, but you don't know who I am. Can you figure out who I am? And so there is some first person and I think some third person as well. It's been a while since I read it, but from what I remember, this story actually, when I started reading it, reminded me of Wizards of Once. And so it's interesting. I wonder.
Do they drop in and out? Do you remember?
Yeah. Yeah. From what I remember, they do drop in and out, but it's very infrequent. It's not nearly as frequent as what Daniel has going on here, where it's like boom, 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 boom. Interesting. That might be something to look at, Daniel, even for you.
It might be.
To see how they played around with first person and third person.
Yeah, they clearly had the same schedule going, as it were. Eventually, like, even the densest reader, after a few chapters, will figure out who it is.
You're right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
That sounded insulting. Whoever they are, I still love them just as much.
You might want to.
Check it out and see if that's something that can potentially help you, because it's hilarious. Number one, it's hilarious. The whole series It's really, really funny. The first 2 books are the best, but the narration stays the same throughout all the books, and
Okay.
and it's used in a perfect
important.
way, like how you're starting to use this. So
Okay.
check that out, Daniel. See if that might help you out to choose.
It
Okay.
might
So
work,
can
but
I?
I'd be very, very careful.
So, couple questions, if I may. Do you guys know who the narrator is? Do you have
So
any?
maybe it's I thought it was a horse, like
And
a potential could be the horse.
okay. And Timothy, did you have a guess or?
No,
Interesting.
didn't have
Okay,
one.
so this
I
is
didn't know
very good
until you
information.
told me.
Yeah,
You told me
because we had that
before, but I.
conversation. Okay, so it's meant to be de la Mer, which is why he keeps complimenting himself.
Oh,
Um,
okay,
and
that makes a lot more sense.
so in my mind, and I say this not as a way of like, I know some people sort of, my students do this too, like they'll go back and explain why they did something and they'll feel like, well, that justifies it, so now you need to just accept it as is, which is not what I'm doing. But as a way of,
How dare you?
helping you to help me, if that makes sense. Since my intention is that de la Mer is the narrator, and that the humor belongs to him, more or less. And I think because you know that, that's why you told me that I probably do want to keep the first person, but I need to figure out how to not have them competing for attention. Is that what I'm hearing? So this is my
Yeah.
second question.
Okay.
Would you say I'm actually competing not just with the voice, but for the reader's sympathies, or like between those two personalities, if you will, the like Nicholas himself and the narrator, or
Well, who's your main character?
well, definitely Nicholas. Yeah.
It seems like an easy question, but I have to ask it sometimes. I have to ask it a lot, just to make sure I'm on the same page with authors, and
Yeah.
Sure.
so I'm not being patronizing there,
Yeah.
because sometimes I'm not 100% sure I'm on the same page with people. I feel like they're in competition. Once the reader knows who it is, I think they will definitely be in competition for first place, for main character kind of thing. But I won't know until I read more. So I'm just telling you what I can see from this first chapter. I just see that as a potential problem with keeping your readers on board with you. You don't want them to ever stop and say, what am I reading? I'm a little confused. And again, I love the character, and I love the narrative voice. I just think it would be best if you make a choice. I recently was reading about point of view and made a recommendation on a book I was working with, and there were a couple of chapters where it was all third person, but there were a couple of chapters where these other characters, these two secondary characters, needed to be not dominant, where they had a conversation that just needed to be there for them, that needed to be in their point of view entirely, and not in the main character's point of view. Instead of letting those chapters just drop in as the only chapters in those characters' points of view, we pulled them out as a prologue and an epilogue, because otherwise you can't have a whole book in one point of view except for just a couple of chapters. It's
Right.
It's just weird, and it's jarring for the reader, because that's who we write for, and who I edit for. Essentially, it's for the reader.
Yeah.
And we've got to keep the reader in mind. And these things that distract a reader, I call them stop moments. Anything that makes a reader stop and go back, not, ooh, I want to reread that, or, ooh, what, sometimes that happens, and we all do that, and it's fine. But the kind of stop where it's, I don't know what's going on, or who is this talking, and I just can't understand that sentence, or whatever. And point of view changes can do that. You want your readers to stay in tune with the story and stay connected with the story. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So point of view shifts can pull a reader out of the story. That's the
Yes.
bottom line. And as long as they don't, it's okay. But that's what we're going for. So
In a way, it's exciting, because I think I sensed that there was a problem, but it hadn't been put into words for me yet. And I felt like it was really good in other ways, and that whatever it was kind of bogging down the good stuff. And I don't want that, obviously. My only problem is that even though I have even taught person in, like essay writing or
Mhm.
other, classroom contexts. In this
Yeah.
context, I'm having trouble figuring out exactly where I'm going back and forth, and so now I'm gonna have to like bite the bullet and figure that out / ask for help figuring that out.
Yeah.
Which is embarrassing because I'm supposed to already know this, but not embarrassing in a general sense. Obviously, we all need help.
Now, another thing to watch for, and this is easily fixed later, but watch for tense. Most of the chapter is in past tense, but every once in a while it drops into present tense. And most of that's when it's first person too. So that may get fixed when all that's separated out a little bit more. I've made a few little notes on your chapter, Daniel, about a few things that would come up in a copy edit, even though like I said, copy editing is not important in a developmental review.
Mhm.
But do you know what scare quotes means? When you put quotations around a word for emphasis.
Okay, I have heard that.
Okay, those tend to be overused and are often unnecessary. So a lot of
You're saying I have used them?
yes.
Okay.
They're often not necessary, and like the nicks, they don't need to be in scare quotes.
Okay.
Think of it as like using those kind of quotes in writing. Think of it as if somebody said, "This meat is all natural." What does that tell you?
It's
It's
not.
not all me.
Okay, think of scare quotes in writing like that, and make sure that you really mean it if you want to put scare quotes around it, because most things do not need scare quotes.
Okay. So
If it needs to be emphasized, we really just used italics and only
okay.
sparsely. But again, that's what an editor does. Little things like that are distracting, and an editor will help you clarify all of that junk.
Yeah.
And that is just editing junk. That's really all it is. That's what we do.
You edit junk.
We
Get it out.
we edit the junk right out. One thing I did want to mention is your spelling style. What you've chosen, you've written in part American English and part British English here. If you publish in the United States, you're probably going to find publishers who tend to use American English spelling just as a rule.
Yeah, and they don't care what the genre is or the context. They just want the American spelling.
Just as a rule, publishers have their own style guides. Big publishers have their own style guides, meaning like the big five have literally their own documents that say this is what we do, and their editors have to follow that. We are small. We use the Chicago Manual of Style for our style guide, Merriam-Webster for spelling, and usually the first, but we also use American English just as a rule. Now you may find somebody who will work with you on that, and you may not. It just kind of depends on what they'll do and what they won't do. But you will find, if you look around, you'll find that there are lots of American books written about people in the UK, but they use American English because they're published in America, and it doesn't damage the story if you're concerned about that.
I do it to just lend an air of authenticity. Is the desire there? You know what I mean? Or of historicity, both.
Sure.
I guess to kind of help you immerse yourself as a reader. If your feeling is that it doesn't actually make that much of a difference.
I'm just saying, you can leave it in. I don't think anybody would reject you on the basis of your using British English, but they might say, we will publish you, but we will be using American English.
Sure.
So
which wouldn't be a problem for me. But.
I'm just saying, you might need to keep that in mind so that you aren't caught off guard.
Oh, okay.
Because publishing houses have their things, and when they have their rules, they tend to stick with them because they can't make a new rule every time. I published a book from somebody who he lived in Australia, but we changed it to American English. Most people who are speaking English either way are used to reading back and forth, and we're not too thrown by that. I mean, it's not like I can't read these words because there's an extra U in it, and it's not like people in the UK or Australia can't read it without the U.
Well, I'm certainly open to it. just
more important things are societal things that might not make sense. Just some things that, like, what's this again? Like, what's that? Can you tell me what you mean by that? Because,
Color?
no, it's not that. Just descriptions. Just little things. Like, we had some funny conversations, but I think on that particular book, I went down a really long rabbit hole about asphalt, but it was, because of all the different
Okay.
words that come up, because there's different words for that in UK, Australian, and Americans. I was like, oh my goodness. And the car park and all that stuff. And everybody, they were walking on something that I didn't understand. So I had to learn a whole lot about Australian materials in their car parks. Yeah, I learned a lot.
Funny.
I've forgotten it, but I was like, oh, this is curious. It was fantasy, but I still ended up learning a lot about asphalt.
Yeah.
I have a hard thing and a great good thing.
Okay.
And it's going to come all in one big rolled up ball of wax, okay? It's one of the reasons why I really wanted you to read the story, okay? Because I knew without a doubt that you hear everything in your wonderful, beautiful narrator's voice.
Oh, thank you.
It's so excellent that there's no way you don't. And I hear what I'm reading in my narrative voice in my head, as do most of us. I've heard that some people don't hear a voice when they read. I don't know what that means, but I've heard that some people don't. Have y'all heard that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy to me.
I know, but I hear that some people don't.
I don't hear a voice.
Okay, so there you go.
You don't?
See, it's just a brain thing.
We have to talk about this.
Yeah,
It has to be a
I know.
whole
It's just a brain
conversation.
thing. He's not broken. He's not broken. He's just fine. That said, you said you have Microsoft Word, right, Daniel?
Sure.
Have you ever used the read aloud function on that?
Not for more than a few seconds.
Okay,
It throws me off.
yeah, because it doesn't sound as good as you do.
You can say that again.
Thank you.
It doesn't. It does not.
I mean, I haven't used it in a while, and obviously with improved AI, maybe it would sound a lot better now. But like back in the day when they started using it, it was just so stilted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was pretty terrible at first, and it's a little less terrible now. I want to challenge you to start using the read aloud function, because your readers will not hear your excellent narration in their head. They're almost 100% not going to be as good at it as you are, and they're not going to be able to know what it's supposed to sound like you do. But read aloud is good at one thing. It reads exactly what's on the page. It never reads intention. It doesn't read humor. It doesn't read inflection. It reads what's on the page. It will help you know a little bit more about what your readers might be reading and hearing in their heads.
What they're actually getting,
Because
whether I'm giving
what
them
they're
or not.
getting. Yeah, because they can't hear your great narration until it goes to audiobook and you get your voice
Your
put
voice
to
in
it. We assume most of the people are going to read it, and we want them to read it, and we want them first and foremost to be able to read it no matter, and get the same gist, get the same humor, get the same story, get all the same wonderfulness, even if they can't hear your voice and have never heard your voice. So your voice is one of your greatest assets, and it's also going to be something that's a hindrance to your writing, because you hear it so great when readers aren't necessarily going to hear a great voice in their head, and their voice narrator may be kind of flat. So you got to make sure the words are doing things that your voice may be filling in for you in your head.
I used to do that when I was script writing, because I used Final Draft, and they let you actually assign different voices to the characters, so the speaking parts are in different voices, and I would listen to, in part because I'm dyslexic, so I would never catch my own spelling mistakes, but then like I'd hear them say something weird, I'd be like, what the I didn't write that, did I?
So I do that. I make mistakes all the time, and I send the guys some of my screenshots of like, hey, look at what I said. Some of them I won't say here because they were such a funny blunder. But yeah, there have been quite the few where I'm like, oh my gosh.
When I have a good relationship with a writer, I like to point out the goofy ones, like, these are, and only when it's a good relationship, and when it's a really silly, goofy one. And they happen sometimes. Typos turn into good jokes sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. So did you have any questions after I said all of those things that were complicated and harrowing?
I don't have any more questions, except I really want to see the nitty gritty. Like, I want to see what you labeled for examples of the things that you mentioned, because some of those things, when you said it, I was like, oh yeah, I get what you're saying. And some of the things I'm like, I believe you, but I don't know where to look,
Okay.
So.
Sure. I'll send that to you.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Yeah. You are welcome.
I know that took you time, and your time is important.
I enjoyed it. I don't like having hard conversations, but their hard conversations are necessary. Good writers want to hear the hard things as well as the good things and the easy things. So I knew it will fine with you guys, but it's always hard to hear, hey, you might need to rethink, because rethinking is really difficult, but I think you have a great framework for a story. So, everybody's on your side.
You can do it.
I only do this because I want people to have the best story they've got in them put down on paper. That's why we do it. It's certainly not to be in charge of somebody, anything like that. I mean, it's not to direct anything or to correct anything. It's to help people make their stories come to life and get out there for as many people to read them and enjoy them, and to become embedded in a world that doesn't stink.
Yeah.
That's a tagline for you. Become embedded in a world that doesn't stink.
There you go. Put it on the cover.
Thank you again. If you've been with us for this whole video, then you're as awesome as Cindy, who is very awesome. And awesome is possibly the most overused word in the world. And yes, I'm a writer.
That's awesome.
Anyway, Cindy, thank you so much for being here with us. Again, Cindy is an editor, freelance, and also edits for a publishing company. And we are very, very, very blessed to have her with us. And we're very blessed to have you guys with us. Hey, if you guys have a query that fits what Cindy is looking for, first of all, please check what she's looking for first.
Yes.
Secondly, send it her way. If you just need advice on dog care, send it her way. I'm kidding. I don't know. Anyway, she's been awesome, and we're really, really grateful to have personable and
Thank you.
kindly
Thank you so much. You guys are great.
Imaginary friends, thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us. And our other imaginary friend, Cindy Bryan, editor extraordinaire. Please watch some more stuff if you feel like it, or if you have more time in your commute. There's some stuff here.